The dare wasn't supposed to mean anything, just another twisted joke passed between men too rich for conscience and too bored for boundaries. It was a quiet night on the top floor of the Varelli, a penthouse so high above New York that the air itself seemed exclusive. Adrian Wolfe sat at the head of the marble poker table, one hand resting on a glass of untouched bourbon, the other holding a perfect set of cards. He didn't smile. He never did. "You've never taken a real risk, Wolfe," said Camden Lark, one of his oldest rivals, voice slick with whiskey and provocation. "All the money, all the women, and still you only touch what you can control." Adrian didn't blink. "And you mistake chaos for courage." Laughter buzzed around the table, but it was nervous. No one really liked challenging Wolfe. He had a way of dismantling people with silence. But tonight, something shifted. "I'll make it simple." Camden leaned forward. "Spend one night with someone we choose. No contracts, no prenups, no background checks. Just one woman, one night, let go for once." Adrian's jaw tensed. His rules were his armor, his distance a fortress. Since his early 20s, he'd known better than to let anyone too close. Physical closeness was manageable. Emotional proximity? Never. He could buy sex, he could tolerate company, but vulnerability, that was dangerous. "I'm not interested in games." "Exactly," Camden smirked. "Because you're scared of losing one." It wasn't the words that got him. It was the way Camden said them, like Adrian was a hollow man in a glass tower, like he was more machine than human. And maybe, deep down, Adrian feared that was true. He downed the bourbon in one sharp breath. "Fine," he said. "One night." And that's how it began. When he entered the hotel suite that night, he expected what they'd arranged. A woman trained to please. Beautiful. Compliant. Expensive. He expected the routine small talk, silk sheets, and silence. What he found was none of that. She was already there, sitting cross-legged on the edge of the bed, wearing an oversized black sweater and jeans. Her hair was loose, wild. Her eyes locked with his the second he walked in. "You're late," she said simply. He blinked. "I wasn't aware I was expected." She stood, not seductively, not shyly, just upright, grounded. Her voice was calm, too calm. "I don't do submission. I'm not here to act like a fantasy. You don't get to touch me because someone paid." Adrian froze. This wasn't what the dare was supposed to be. This wasn't how women in these situations talked. But she didn't flinch, didn't soften. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena." He could feel the night slipping from his control already. He stepped further inside. "And what are you here for, Elena?" She looked him dead in the eye. "I'm here because I needed the money, not because I want you. So if you want to undress someone's body, pick someone else. But if you're brave enough to spend a night without pretending, sit down." He didn't know what startled him more, that she was defiant, or that a part of him wanted to obey. He sat that night. They didn't kiss, they didn't touch, they didn't even lie next to each other. They just talked until the hour blurred, until the space between them became something unspoken. Adrian Wolfe, who never lost control, had just met the one woman who refused to give it to him. Adrian Wolfe wasn't born into money. He built his empire with a mind sharp enough to gut markets and a heart cold enough to survive betrayal. At 36, he had turned Wolfe Capital into a global force, held stakes in technology firms, clean energy startups, and controlled more information than most governments. People whispered that he never lost a negotiation, never cracked under pressure, never trusted anyone. Especially women. That part wasn't gossip, it was history. At 22, he had fallen for a woman who knew exactly how to use his love against him. When she walked away, she didn't just leave a scar, she shattered the part of him that once believed in softness. Since then, he had rules. No emotional entanglements, no vulnerability, no unknown variables. His relationships, if they could be called that, were scheduled, structured, and signed in ink. He wasn't afraid of loneliness. He preferred it. It gave him control. Control was everything. It was how he rose above the noise, how he stayed untouchable. Until Elena. Elena Rivera had never been untouchable. She had known struggle the way most people knew routine. Born to immigrant parents in a working-class Brooklyn neighborhood, she was the eldest of 3 children. Her father, once a construction worker, died in an accident when she was 16, leaving her mother already suffering from degenerative arthritis to raise them alone. But Elena stepped up. She quit her art scholarship application, traded painting for practicality, and started working every job she could find. At 22, she juggled 3, a daytime barista job, nighttime dishwashing at a Korean diner, and weekend food delivery. Her dreams didn't disappear, they were just shelved to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Her mother's condition had worsened lately, and so had the rent. Their landlord threatened eviction. She had exhausted every option, borrowed, begged, calculated, but numbers didn't care about good intentions. When a former co-worker mentioned an exclusive agency that paid women to be companions for private clients, Elena said no at first. Then she said maybe. Then she said yes, just once. She wouldn't sleep with anyone. That part she promised herself. She'd show up, play the role, take the money, and walk away. Simple. But nothing about Adrian Wolfe turned out to be simple. The moment she saw him, tall, unreadable, eyes like ash and glass, she knew he wasn't a man used to being told no, which made telling him exactly that feel like reclaiming something she hadn't realized she'd lost. She didn't know he was a billionaire. She didn't know his name. She just saw the way he held himself, like the world owed him submission, and she was tired of bending. That night, something shifted between them, not romantically, not yet. But Elena saw something behind Adrian's stillness, not power, not ego, emptiness. She recognized it because she carried her own. The next morning she left without saying goodbye. She didn't expect to see him again. But New York had a twisted sense of humor. A week later, while rushing between deliveries, she ran into him near Bryant Park. Literally. Her bike's front wheel clipped the edge of his coat as he stepped off the curb. She cursed under her breath, barely slowing down until she heard him say, "Elena?" She turned, startled. His voice hadn't changed, still quiet, still calm. But his eyes weren't cold this time. They were curious, and for a man like Adrian Wolfe, curiosity was dangerous. That meeting set off a series of collisions, neither of them planned. Adrian started showing up at the coffee shop where she worked, always at odd hours, always alone. He never asked personal questions, never flirted. He just watched. Sometimes he read the paper. Sometimes he asked what music was playing. And sometimes he just sat there like silence was safer with her around. Elena didn't know what to make of it. She didn't trust him, not really, but she didn't fear him either, and that was new. Men like Adrian weren't supposed to see girls like her, not in daylight, not outside closed doors, but he did. Not always, not deeply, but enough. Enough for her to notice, enough for her to wonder. Who was this man who didn't speak unless it mattered? Who watched without judging? Who accepted her refusal like it was a challenge rather than an insult? She didn't tell her family. There was no need. Adrian wasn't a part of her world. Not yet. He belonged to glass buildings, driverless cars, silent offices where the air smelled like money. She belonged to crowded laundromats, discount grocery aisles, and knees that ached after 12-hour shifts. They didn't belong in the same frame, and yet the city kept pushing them together. Like gravity, like something bigger than coincidence. Neither of them said it aloud, but something had begun that night, something neither money nor desperation could fully explain. Something neither of them were ready for, but neither could walk away from. Adrian didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't the kind of man who lingered. He didn't check his phone for messages from women, didn't remember birthdays, didn't wake up wondering what someone else might be doing at that hour. But after the night with Elena, something shifted. At first, it was just curiosity. She had looked him in the eye and told him no, and not with disdain or flirtation, just certainty. He wasn't used to that. Most people bent, and those who didn't usually broke. But she didn't bend, and she didn't break. She just walked away. That should have been the end. But instead, he found himself walking into that cramped little coffee shop off 32nd Street, where she worked the day shift, pretending to be in the area for meetings. He didn't speak to her directly at first. He ordered coffee like everyone else, took a seat by the window and read the same newspaper twice. But he watched, not in a predatory way, but like a man trying to solve a puzzle he wasn't ready to admit mattered. She moved, like someone with 1,000 weights on her shoulders, but no time to complain about them. She was always wiping, reaching, serving, rushing, yet never flustered. She was precise, efficient. But sometimes, when no one was looking, she would stop and just breathe for a second, eyes closing like she was trying to slow down the world. He noticed those seconds more than anything. Elena noticed him too, of course. How could she not? The man was a shadow, always alone, always silent, but never invisible. The other baristas whispered about him, tried to flirt when taking his order, but he never responded. His eyes never wandered. They only seemed to follow her. It made her nervous, not because she felt threatened, but because she didn't understand what he wanted. Men like him didn't hang around places like this unless they wanted something. But Adrian didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to talk about that night. He didn't slip her money, or offers, or explanations. He just kept showing up. One rainy afternoon, as thunder cracked outside and the cafe emptied, he stood near the register while she counted change. "You work too much," he said. She didn't look up. "You watch too much." "I could help," he added quietly. "Why would you?" Her voice wasn't hostile, just tired. "Because I want to," he answered. She finally looked at him then. Her eyes didn't soften. "Then, go buy a meal for someone who hasn't eaten today. I'm not your project." That night, he didn't sleep. He lay awake thinking about her voice, the curve of her spine as she bent over the counter, the weight in her tone that no 22-year-old should have to carry. He thought about the word project and why it stung. Days passed. He stopped going to the cafe, not because he lost interest, but because he was trying to convince himself she was right. That it was pity or fascination or the echo of a dare still messing with his head. But absence didn't cure him. It just made the silence louder. One night, 2 weeks after they last spoke, Adrian was walking past a bodega in Queens when he saw her. Elena, in a soaked hoodie, delivering groceries to a woman in a second-floor walk-up. She didn't see him. She was too busy dragging a crate up the steps, her face flushed from the cold. He stood there in the dark for several minutes, watching her disappear into the building. That's when he made the call. The next day, Elena received an anonymous envelope at her apartment. Inside was a prepaid rent receipt for the next 3 months. No note, no name, just a blank expression of power. She knew immediately it was him. She stormed into the coffee shop 2 mornings later, furious, cheeks burning. He was already there. "Do you think money fixes everything?" she asked, voice low but sharp. He didn't move. "No," he said, "but I thought it might give you room to breathe." "You don't get to decide what I need," she snapped. "You don't get to buy me peace. I'm not trying to own you." "Then why are you doing this?" Her eyes demanded an answer. He could have said anything. That he was trying to help. That he saw something in her that reminded him what it meant to feel human. But instead, he told the truth. Because I can't stop thinking about you, and it terrifies me. The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Real? Elena stared at him like he'd said something dangerous, something she didn't want to need. She walked away without replying. But that night, she didn't throw away the rent receipt. She tucked it inside a drawer and locked it. The following weeks were strange. They didn't see each other often, but when they did, it was like the world narrowed down to two people who didn't know what to do with the gravity pulling them closer. She found herself noticing his hands, how still they were when he listened, how tightly he curled them into fists when he was holding back words. He noticed how she bit the inside of her cheek when thinking, how her voice dropped half an octave when she was scared. One evening, he waited outside the diner where she washed dishes. She didn't look surprised. She let him walk her home in silence. When they reached the corner, she stopped. "I don't have time for flings," she said. "Neither do I," he replied. That was the beginning of whatever it was. They didn't call it dating. They didn't talk about rules. He didn't take her to expensive restaurants. She didn't ask for promises. They just started showing up in each other's lives with increasing regularity. He bought her gloves for winter, simple, warm, no brand. She brought him homemade soup when he had a cold, barely seasoned, but he finished every drop. It wasn't passion, it was proximity, but from it, something warmer began to rise. Still, neither of them admitted it. She was scared of needing him. He was scared of being needed. One night she had a panic attack. Too many bills. Too many hours. She locked herself in the bathroom of her apartment and cried until her stomach hurt. When she opened the door, he was sitting on the hallway floor, back against the wall, waiting. "How did you know?" she whispered. "You didn't come to the cafe today," he answered. "You never miss Tuesdays." That night, she fell asleep on the couch with her head on his lap, and for the first time, he let someone rest against him without flinching. He stroked her hair without meaning to, and she didn't move away. When morning came, neither of them said a word. But something had changed. For Adrian Wolfe, who lived in control, in plans, in the safety of distance, that night was a storm. And for Elena, who had built walls from struggle and silence, he was the first crack in the armor she didn't realize was suffocating her. They weren't in love, not yet. But they were no longer pretending, they were just passing through. Elena didn't trust easy. That wasn't cynicism, it was survival. She had seen too many promises fall apart in the hands of men who swore they'd stay. Her father had once promised he'd always protect them. Then one rain-slicked construction site ended it all. Her first boyfriend had sworn she was his world, right before leaving when the bills piled too high. So when Adrian Wolfe began showing up, not with flashy gestures, but with quiet consistency, she didn't know where to place him. He never tried to impress her. He never even complimented her looks. But he remembered small things, the way she liked her tea, the fact that her youngest brother was allergic to shellfish, that she chewed her straw when anxious. And more than once, she caught him watching her like she was a question he had no right to answer. She had learned to live without help. It wasn't pride, exactly, it was necessity. No one had ever stayed long enough for their help to matter. So when Adrian began stepping into the background of her life, not like a savior, but like a steady presence, she didn't know how to stop him. She also didn't know how much of her was already slipping into his world. One evening after her delivery shift, she came home to find her mother sitting in the dark, her legs swollen from another flare-up. The heating had gone out. Again. Elena lit a candle, wrapped her mom in blankets, and sat there until her body stopped shaking. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years. But later that night, she sent Adrian a single text. "How do you make the wait stop?" He replied within minutes. "You don't. You just find someone willing to carry a corner of it with you." She didn't respond, but she didn't delete the message either. The next morning, she found a heating unit installed in their apartment. No signature, no receipt, just warmth. She confronted him the same night, waited for him outside his office. her shoulders tight with anger. "You went behind my back again," she said. "I didn't ask for that heater." "You didn't have to," he said calmly. "Your silence was enough. You think I need saving? I think you need rest. You don't know what I need, Adrian. Then tell me." He was standing so still, so open, it unnerved her. No man had ever asked her to define her needs. No man had stood still long enough to listen. She wanted to scream at him, to demand he stop fixing things, but instead she whispered, "I need to stop being afraid." He exhaled slowly. "So do I." That night she went home without slamming a door. She didn't block his number. She just sat in her kitchen long after everyone had gone to sleep, wondering when care started to feel like a threat. The following week, she started her period of unpaid leave from her diner job after a hand injury made it impossible to grip anything. Adrian found out, not because she told him, but because she stopped responding to his messages. She had never ghosted him before. That scared him more than it should have. He showed up at her apartment. Her brother opened the door, sleepy and barefoot. "She's in her room. She doesn't want to talk." "I won't make her," he said. He waited in the hallway for 2 hours, leaning against the peeling paint, listening to nothing but silence. When she finally opened the door, her face was unreadable. She didn't speak, just stepped out, closed the door behind her, and sat next to him on the floor. "You keep trying to fix things with money," she said after a long pause. "I know." "And you think that's enough?" "No." "Then why do you keep doing it?" "Because I don't know any other way to show I care." She looked at him then, her gaze softer than it had ever been. "Then learn." That was the first time she invited him to stay, not in her room, but in her presence. They sat on the floor until dawn, her head eventually resting against his shoulder. He didn't touch her, didn't kiss her, but he didn't move away either. The next day, she told him everything about the debt collectors, about her mother's worsening condition, about the fear she lived with every single day, and he told her about his past, about the woman who pretended to love him, only to leak his secrets to his rivals, about how he built his company not out of ambition, but out of spite, about how trust felt like a wound that never closed. "So we're both screwed up," she said. "Maybe that's why we found each other," he replied. But just as their connection deepened, reality intruded again. Adrian's board was preparing for a major merger, and every move he made was scrutinized. Rumors had begun circulating, whispers that he was distracted, emotionally compromised. One of his partners even confronted him. "People are talking, Adrian. You've gone soft." He ignored them. He wasn't willing to abandon Elena for the sake of image, but he also hadn't told her everything. She didn't know that he was covering her mother's hospital bills now, that he had instructed his legal team to secure her family against eviction, that he was moving mountains in silence so she wouldn't feel the weight. When she found out by accident, through a conversation between nurses at the clinic, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just showed up at his penthouse, walked straight into his office and said, "You crossed a line." "I was trying to protect you," he said. "You were trying to own me." "That's not true." "Then why didn't you tell me?" He didn't have an answer, not one she wanted to hear. She turned to leave. He stepped forward. "Don't walk away." "Then stop treating me like a project," her voice cracked. "I've spent my whole life building something for myself, no matter how small. It's mine. Don't you dare take that from me." He didn't follow her, not this time. He let her go, even though it broke every instinct inside him. She needed space. She needed to reclaim something he hadn't meant to steal. And he needed to learn that love isn't about protection. It's about permission. In the weeks that followed, Elena didn't call, didn't text. She focused on her recovery, on helping her mother, on researching scholarships to go back to school. She didn't know what she would say if Adrian showed up again. She didn't know if she'd forgive him, but late at night, when the world was quiet, she found herself reaching for the sweater he'd once left behind. She wore it like armor, like memory. And sometimes, when she dared to dream again, she let herself imagine what it might be like to build something real with him, not because of him. It happened on a Wednesday, the kind of day that didn't announce itself as life-altering. Elena had just finished a long shift at the campus library, part of her new schedule since she started classes at the community college. Her hands were stained with ink from sorting old archives, and her body ached from sitting too long in a stiff-backed chair. She stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, her coat too thin for the sudden wind, her thoughts already drifting toward the grocery list in her bag. That's when she saw him, Adrian, leaning against his car on the other side of the street, not in a suit, but in a plain black sweater and jeans. He looked out of place, like he didn't belong anywhere, that didn't smell like power and concrete. But the moment their eyes met, Elena knew. He wasn't here for a coincidence. He'd waited. She didn't move for a second. She wanted to pretend she didn't feel anything, to act like his presence didn't send her heart into panic. But then he stepped forward, slowly, like he was walking into a memory he'd been afraid to touch. "You look different," he said. "So do you." Her voice was steady, but her hands curled into fists in her pockets. "I wanted to give you space," he continued, "and now you're here to take it back?" He shook his head. "I'm here to ask for something else." She raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Your time, just 1 hour, one honest hour." She hesitated. She could have said no. She could have turned away and gone back to the world she was rebuilding. But something in his eyes, raw, uncertain, unguarded, made her nod. They ended up at a small park nearby, sitting on opposite ends of a bench like strangers trying not to care. He told her everything, about the board's warnings, about the legal safeguards he had quietly put in place for her family, about the way he'd spent the last month learning how to be quiet with himself, how to live without intervening, how to want someone without needing to possess them. "I used to think loving meant fixing," he admitted. "Now I think it means standing still, letting you breathe, letting you fall if you need to." Elena listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to forgive. But when he finally stopped speaking, she turned to him and said, "You want to be let in, but this time you wait at the door." He nodded. "As long as it takes." And then, without touching, without promises, they simply sat together, watching leaves fall like the slow unraveling of silence. 2 days later, she texted him, "Dinner, my place, nothing fancy." He showed up with groceries. She didn't wear makeup. They cooked side by side, clumsy and uncoordinated, arguing over seasoning and laughing when the rice burned. It was the first time they'd ever been alone without the tension of expectation. After the dishes were done, they sat on the floor with cups of tea, legs touching only at the knee. "I don't want a prince," she said softly. "I don't want a man who saves me. I want a man who stays when it's hard." "I never knew how," he replied. "I'm still learning." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then, let's learn slowly." The kiss came hours later. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't planned. She was reaching for a blanket, and he reached too, their hands brushing, eyes catching, breath halting. When their lips met, it was quiet, hesitant, like two people touching a wound for the first time. He didn't rush. She didn't pull away. When they made love, it wasn't about claiming or surrendering. It was about presence, hands memorizing skin like scripture, mouths tasting not hunger, but relief. He moved with reverence, like she was something rare and finite, and she held him like he was breakable, not because he was weak, but because she finally understood how much he'd hidden to survive. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets that didn't smell of wealth or power, just warmth. Her head rested on his chest, and for the first time, she felt safe enough to fall asleep with someone still watching. When morning came, neither of them moved for a long time. "So now what?" she asked, eyes still closed. "Now I wake up with you," he said. "And not just today." She smiled, eyes still shut. "You're serious." "I want to be part of the life you're building, not from the top down, but from where you are." She opened her eyes. "That means learning to let me do it my way." "Then teach me." They spent the next few weeks in a rhythm that felt unreal. Morning coffee with grocery receipts, study nights where he read her drafts and she fixed his grammar. She met his dog. He helped her youngest brother with a math test. No headlines, no corporate drama. Just two people discovering what it meant to choose each other on purpose. But it couldn't last untouched. One night, after dinner with his board members, one of them pulled him aside and said, "She's lovely, but is she durable?" Adrian didn't respond. He didn't need to. He looked the man in the eye and said, "She's the strongest person in this room." Elena heard about the comment later. He didn't tell her, his assistant did, but instead of rage, she laughed. "Let them wonder," she said, "as long as you know." He kissed her hand. "I do." Then came the evening that changed everything. A small gala for community outreach Adrian had donated anonymously, but the event coordinator begged him to attend. Elena insisted on coming with him. She wore a simple navy dress, no designer label, no diamonds, just herself. When they entered, the room quieted, not out of scandal but disbelief. Adrian Wolfe, the man known for staying single, was holding hands with a woman who didn't belong to his world and looked utterly unbothered by it. During the speech, he was asked to say a few words. He stood at the podium, looked around the room, and simply said, "For most of my life, I built things to prove I didn't need anyone. Then I met a woman who showed me that building together is stronger than building alone." When he stepped down, Elena was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He reached for her hand. "Ready to keep building?" he asked. She squeezed his fingers. "Only if you don't skip steps." They left the gala early, walked the city streets like tourists, sharing fries and stories. They talked about their future, not a fantasy, but real things. Her schooling, his company, the ways they'd keep their independence while still showing up for each other. And that night, as they fell asleep in her apartment, her place, her space, her bed, he whispered into her hair, "I've had everything, but this is the first thing that feels like enough." She didn't reply with words, just turned in his arms and kissed him like a promise. They had crossed the line between longing and belonging, and this time they weren't afraid of what came next. Love, no matter how carefully nurtured, always meets its test. For Adrian and Elena, it came in the form of one brutal truth neither of them saw coming. It began with a phone call. Elena was in the kitchen, stirring pasta on the stove, humming under her breath, a tune she didn't recognize but had found herself repeating every time she felt peace. Adrian was in the living room, thumbing through a folder with the latest budget breakdown for a housing program he'd started funding anonymously under her name. He didn't tell her he was doing that, not yet. He wanted it to be perfect, to present it as a gift, not a gesture of control. But when the call came, it cut through the warmth like a blade. She picked up with a smile that faded almost instantly. Her expression tightened, her grip on the spoon slackened, and her mouth parted in disbelief. Adrian watched her go pale, saw the spoon fall into the pot, heard the words. She whispered, "What do you mean he's being investigated?" Her older brother, Marco, the one who worked night shifts at the warehouse, had been caught up in a fraud ring. He wasn't guilty, but he had signed off on something blindly, trusting someone who didn't deserve it, and now his name was on documents tied to federal suspicion. Elena turned to Adrian in panic. "We need a lawyer," she said. "A good one, and I can't afford—" "I'll handle it," he said without thinking. But that's when it happened. That flicker in her eyes, that old instinct, that wound. She stepped back slowly. "You'll handle it," she repeated, "like always." "Elena, that's not what I meant. But it's what you do. Something goes wrong and you solve it with your money before I even have a chance to try. Because I want to protect you." "No, Adrian." Her voice trembled now. "You want to protect your version of me, the girl who needs saving, the girl you can keep safe if you just pay fast enough." He stood, words half-formed, but she wasn't done. "You said you wanted to build with me, not for me, and I believed you, but every time you go behind my back, every time you act before I speak, you're telling me you still don't trust me to stand on my own." He reached for her. "That's not true." "Then why does it feel like it is?" The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was heavy. Elena's shoulders dropped, her breath shaky. "I need to help my brother, but I need to do it my way, even if it's messy, even if it's not perfect. And if you can't stand beside me without taking over, then maybe we're not where we thought we were." He wanted to fight her, wanted to argue that love meant stepping in, but something in her face, raw, honest, unshaking, made him stop. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I need space," she whispered, "to remember who I was before you." That night, she packed a small bag, kissed him once soft, trembling, and walked out the door. No dramatic exit, no tears, just a woman choosing herself. Days passed, then weeks. Adrian tried not to fall apart. He buried himself in work, in numbers, in silence. His penthouse echoed with the absence of her laughter, of her messy teacups, of the sweater she always left on the armchair. His staff noticed his withdrawal. His board noticed his aggression. He snapped in meetings. He missed calls. He walked away from deals mid-sentence. But he didn't reach out. Not once. Because this time, he knew the only way to keep her was to let her go. Elena moved into a friend's spare room. She took extra shifts, researched lawyers, and stood by Marco through court dates and legal chaos. She made mistakes. She cried in stairwells, but she stood. She didn't call Adrian, not even when nights got too quiet, not even when she missed him so much her chest ached, because she needed to be sure that when they found each other again it would be by choice, not rescue. One morning, she received a letter. Handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single sheet, Adrian's handwriting, not a plea, not an apology, just words. "You were right. I don't know how to love without taking control, but I'm learning. Not to step in, but to stand still. Not to fix, but to ask. I'm here, and I'll wait not at your doorstep, but at the edge of the life you invite me into. When you're ready. Not because you need me, but because you want me." Elena held the letter against her chest, eyes closed. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't guilt. It was hope. 3 days later, she showed up at his office. No warning, no drama. She walked past his assistant, past the corner offices and high ceilings, and stepped into his private suite. He was standing at the window, phone in hand, mid-call. He turned, and for the first time in weeks, his face softened. He ended the call without a word. She said nothing, just walked up to him, slowly, steadily, and placed the letter on his desk. "I'm not perfect," she said, "and I don't want to be someone's mission, but I've never wanted someone to stay more than I want you." He didn't move, he didn't speak. His eyes searched hers like he was trying to believe it. "I don't need you to build a life for me," she continued. "I want to build one with you, the messy way, the slow way, the real way." And finally he reached for her, not to hold, not to claim, but just to touch, lightly, fingers brushing fingers. "Then let's start," he said. That night, they didn't celebrate with champagne or sex or declarations. They sat on the kitchen floor, eating leftover noodles, talking about everything they'd gotten wrong. They didn't promise forever. They didn't draw maps of the future, but they made space for learning, for stumbling, for loving each other not through perfection, but presence. They knew there would be more fights, more fears, but they also knew that this time they wouldn't walk away when things got heavy. They would stand still, together. 6 months later, Elena stood on the rooftop of the new community center in Brooklyn, the same place where her father used to walk her past on the way home from school, now rebuilt with funds from Adrian's foundation, co-managed under her name. She wore a navy blue blouse, smudged with paint, hair tied in a loose bun, hands still trembling from placing the last plaque on the wall. It read, "For the ones who build with their hands and stay with their hearts." Behind her, Adrian approached slowly, no longer in suits that cost more than a year's rent, but in rolled sleeves and scuffed boots. He placed a bottle of sparkling cider beside her and said, "You did it." She turned, smiling, not just because of the building, not just because of the plaque, but because when she looked at him now, she no longer saw a billionaire trying to rescue her. She saw a man who had chosen to rebuild himself too. "We did it," she corrected. "You could have done it without me," he replied, "but I didn't want to." They sat at the edge of the rooftop, feet dangling over the city they both loved and feared. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked quietly. "The first night, the dare." He smirked. "I try not to remember how arrogant I was." "You weren't just arrogant. You were terrified." He looked at her. Terrified of what? That someone might see past all of it, the money, the power, the armor. "And you?" he asked. "What were you afraid of?" She took a long breath. "That someone might finally stay and I wouldn't know how to let them." He reached over, took her hand, not with urgency, just certainty. "We're not who we were," he said. "No," she agreed. "We're better." Below them, the city hummed with ordinary life. But up here, something felt different, grounded, possible. Elena looked at him and saw not the man who once tried to buy peace, but the man who had learned to sit with discomfort, to ask instead of assume, to love without possession. And Adrian saw in her not the girl who needed saving, but the woman who taught him that love isn't about taking someone out of the fire, it's about standing with them in the heat. They didn't need vows to prove it. They didn't need headlines. They just needed this, a rooftop, a future, and the quiet truth that some stories don't begin with fairy tales. They begin with chaos, with a dare, with a mistake that wasn't really a mistake at all. Because sometimes the wrong night leads you to the right person, and sometimes love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it's about showing up over and over until the fear fades and the walls fall. And what's left is something neither of them thought they deserved, but both of them chose. Every day, from now on. And if anyone ever asked Elena how it all began, she would smile softly and say, "I lost a dare, but I found everything else.